Have you ever wondered why some victims of narcissistic abuse end up overcomers while others end up abusers themselves? I think this is a really important question to ask, and I'm going to be covering it in relation to families, also in church, and how a lot of religious narcissism happens. But it goes back to early childhood developmental trauma, complex PTSD, and childhood abuse, things of the sort, and how leaving that unaddressed, unwilling to face it, and other components can lead to becoming like who abused us. And I like to speak from a lived truth point of view. I was listening to Myron Golden this morning. He's a favorite speaker of mine. I learned a lot from him. And he was talking about not speaking from, just written notes and books, which, we can do that, but speaking from things that we have lived, things that we have dissected ourselves, the truth of the matter, living it out, doing the work ourselves, and then speaking about it. And so this is a topic I have been living out for some years now, I think since 2018, and it's been quite an adventure. And I've learned a lot through it about myself, about this topic, about others around me, and those who have been abused, unfortunately, early in life, and two different ways it can go. Again, I'm only going to be speaking from my lived experience, from my own personal family, my personal life, self-discovery, observations, things of the sort. So a basic rundown is I grew up in a family where my dad was a pastor, mom, pastor's wife. She ended up becoming a missionary. Anyway, I grew up in a very religious household. And I would remember hearing horrible stories about things that would happen to my dad when he was little, and I'm not going to expound on that. It's private, but you hear these stories, or I'd hear certain things, with my mom and some of the things she faced, which should incite some compassion and be like, did anything ever come of that? Did you go to therapy? That's terrible. Do you want to talk about it? And it's just, no, everything's fine. And everything was so performative. Everything was church, Bible. Yet our home was so dysfunctional. Lots of abuse. So the things that were happening, to my dad was just being passed down because it went undealt with. And there's more to it than that. There's other aspects to it. But today I'm talking about more the emotional aspect of it. And when people are unwilling to face what happened to them early in life and how that could have affected them, impacted them, and impacted others outside of them due to what happened to them. And the unwillingness to face what happened to you and the ramifications. And so we're just church. Everything's performative. From the outside looking in, we look relatively normal, kind of. And, we're all in school and going to church, and my parents are pastoring churches and doing all the church activities. Meanwhile, it's like a dumpster fire in our home of dysfunction, fear, anger, just a lot of narcissism. And without going into all that, because that's another topic, when I would hear these stories about what would happen to my parents and that they never addressed it, it always just didn't sit well with me. And then I had also realized, no negative emotions were allowed to be felt in our home outside of my dad's anger. Everybody had to be happy and, obedient, and no complaining, don't be negative, everything's good. And it was all about appearances, certain behaviors, how we had to look, act, speak. And so I'm saying this because emotions weren't allowed. And it's a repeating pattern. You know, my dad and my mom didn't really face what, especially my dad, did not face what happened to them when they were little. And I get it. It's not easy. It's a terribly painful process to have to relive it to a degree. But they didn't do that work. And then because they didn't do that work, they just repeat the pattern. And again, there's various complexities to all the dynamics. So I didn't start going to therapy until I think I was in my mid-30s. There were no such thing as boundaries or talking about our feelings or anything like that. It was just, like I said, performative. If you would have asked me before, I would have told you my family was like the Brady Bunch. And everything was outside of me. Like, there was no acknowledgement of myself, really. I just existed to serve, basically, outside of myself. And even though I was a deeply feeling person, deeply loving person, I think because of all that happened to me, you know, because of what happened to them and they didn't face it, then it was happening to us. And nobody's addressing it until like late 30s when we're finally starting to realize there's something wrong here. And I was finding myself in patterns of like abusive relationships and like, okay, why am I choosing these? What's going on with me? And so, and also I was starting to understand at that point what narcissism was. So at that point, I decided to go to therapy, and I started within a couple of different therapists, and they were good, but it was my main therapist in 2018 when I was 38 that really started the deep trauma work, where she would have me say why I was there, my concerns, and I didn't even know how to feel my own feelings. I didn't even know I was allowed to be angry at things. I just had to smile through everything. And so when I would say this happened, she would, you know, click her pen and write things down. I'm like, is that bad? And she would just, you know, she would be speechless several times. But it was all like normal to me. And my feelings were so stuffed down. And that's the problem I'm getting to, is that your feelings aren't allowed to be acknowledged in a family like this. And then when you get older and you get busy and you don't want to face it, it's stuffed, it's ignored, it's treated like that doesn't matter, we're not going to live in the past, don't be negative, I got stuff to do, I don't have time for that. The long-term ramifications of ignoring your emotions for a person's life and the people around them are significant. So with my therapist in 2018, and I remember her saying things like, you're allowed to be angry at that. And I'm thinking, allowed? I had to be given permission to feel. I remember that clearly. So anyway, with her, it was really helpful to start unpacking. And again, people have different severities and degrees of trauma where people can become mute, dissociated, and all sorts of things. I was at a point where I already started healing a little bit before this with some other therapy, but still like had a long way to go. And so what she helped me do is to get back in my body and to feel what I needed to feel, to understand, what is this feeling in my chest? What is this feeling in my stomach? Why does it feel hot or swirly here when I think about that? Or, you know, trying to get me to get in my body, to connect to myself, to feel what's going on and name it. And she really helped me begin to do that. And I remember her saying that she was willing to help me, because at that time I was in a near homeless situation, but I needed help and I really wanted to get better. And she said she could see I'm willing to put in the work. And that's the problem. There's a lot of people not willing to put in the work. And granted, I had a lot of work to do. Still working on things, but by the grace of God, I have come a long way. And now with this process, I was able to start naming things, allowing myself to feel angry, acknowledging what happened to me here, or this abandonment, this rejection, all the stuff from early in life, in the family dynamic, all the different dynamics within a family system of narcissism, lots of factors. And then you have like romantic partners, and then you have people in church and abusive leadership, abusive power, and those systems. And then you have, like I said, partners or friends. And so when I'm with these people, I'm noticing they're not addressing what happened to them, because sometimes things would come up where you'd hear, oh, when I was little, or you'd hear like a story told, and you're thinking, that's horrible that happened to you. But they didn't ever do anything about it. And again, the same question, well, have you talked to anybody about that? That's terrible you went through that. And then it's just, no, like, that's in the past. It's negative. I don't need to visit the past. I don't live in the past. I live in the future. Or all the spiritual bypassing, that's another one. And whether it's in church or whether it's in whatever spirituality, it's this spiritual bypassing where, again, it's no negative feelings. And it's, I don't know even how to describe it, avoiding facing hard things and applying like the Bible to it, or whatever spiritual practices people are into. And it's, we're only going to focus on the physical, not the physical, the here and the now, and the positive, love and light. And it's the same with, stuff with the Bible. They'll just use affirming Bible verses to negate the horribly painful stuff they're feeling. And I'm fine. Everything's fine. Love and light. It's the same thing. It's just one uses the Bible to do it, and others use like, New Age spirituality or whatever. So that's all the spiritual bypassing to avoid either accountability or hard things that we feel on the inside. And the ramifications of that are unpleasant. And so that's what I'm talking about today, is the necessary need for emotional health and the courage it takes, the process it takes to face what happened. If horrible things happened early in life, and then it's impacting relationships now, whether you're hyper independent and nobody's getting close to me, or you have too many people close to you, and all the codependency and all the stuff. Again, not getting into all that right now. When I would be in church, I would notice the same thing. It's all, we're all in church and praising God. But behind closed doors, it's quite a different story. And there's like either superiority or contempt for weakness, which is everything I experienced when I was growing up. There's such a contempt for weak people and get it together, and you don't have faith. But what it is, they don't know how to deal with people and their weakness. Anyway, that's another story. But they never dealt with their stuff. These people that I'm talking about, that I have observed, they didn't fully deal with their stuff. They may have touched it for a very short time and then just went on and went back to work, whether with their career or with church or what have you. They never really dealt with what happened, how it affected them, how it affects their relationships, how it affects their family, how it affects their decision making, and all of the things. And so some of the people that harmed me the most in the church were people who were harmed early in life by their own family members, or other people who were allowed close access to them and had bad things happen to them. And it just was never faced, never acknowledged, just buried. And that's when somebody can become like who hurt them. Instead of being like an overcomer, because I call it overcomer, not just surviving, but overcoming, because I believe that's totally possible. But that can contribute to becoming like who hurt you. And also, bitterness was one of my problems because of the anger at like a lot of the injustice. And once I really discovered like how badly this affected my life, how badly it derailed like my decision making. And again, I'm not blaming everybody, but their actions did impact my life significantly. And then they all just seemed to be living happy and pain-free lives without consequences. And so I entertained anger a little too long. It's not a bad thing to entertain anger at all. Like, it's good to acknowledge what's in there to get it to come out. However, I stayed angry for too long, and I wasn't willing to forgive him. And that's a whole nother topic that I've been very manipulated for a long time, how they would use the Bible to manipulate me regarding forgiveness. However, I came to my own understanding through this process of what forgiveness really is. And when I was in unforgiveness and holding them within me, that anger was just eating me up, and I became bitter. And when you become bitter, you become either indifferent or cruel. You want to see them suffer. You start to become like them, in a sense. And then there's also the aspect of like what you call like narcissistic fleas, meaning, okay, you grew up in this environment. There's a saying like, if you're around fire, you're going to smell like smoke. Or if you're around a dirty dog, you're going to pick up some fleas. And so that happens, but we're aware of it, and we want to work on it and not have this continuously affect our relationships and our decisions moving forward, that we can get better. So there's different aspects as to why a person can become like the very person who harmed them. But the main fact of not looking at what happened to us, either too short or just saying, no, love and light, I'm not going to look at the past. I don't need to do that. I've got work to do here. That stuff doesn't bother me anymore. Or going for a session and going, I'm not doing that, which is what my dad did. I think he went like one time and said, I'm not doing that. And they'll either think it's stupid or foolish, or they don't have time for it, or for whatever reason they're not going to do it, or they just don't think they have any problems. Everything's going well for them, so why do they need therapy, right? And then in the church, they become like the abusers themselves in one form or fashion. So there's a saying, I have it written down here. It's a good principle that applies to anything really. It could be therapist, could be a church person, a pastor, a person who works to help others. And the principle is, before you save the world, before you save the world, get your own house in order, meaning your own life. And so when I'm telling you these things, it's been a process. It's been a process, and an important one. But I want to say that that's an important tactic, if you want to call it, is one thing that was helpful for me is getting back in my body. And not everybody has the resource to be able to be with a therapist. Mine happened to work with me because she could see I wanted to get better and worked with me a lot pro bono. That can be available for people, but it's not always available. But if there's somebody who's a safe person to sit with, to start somehow unpacking this, again, depending on the degree of the severity of the trauma, if they have the capacity to start talking about it. And start paying attention to your own body. Start paying attention to the feelings of like, what's going on. And it gets you out of like this dissociated state and gets you present and in your own body. And you can feel, this is like a swirling in my chest. This feels like fear. Feels like a punch in my stomach. Grief, like naming these things. And here's what happened. Writing helped me a whole lot. And all of this is to say, it was a starting process to get me back in my own body, to start being aware of my own emotions with a person who was safe enough to hear it. Because that's important too. A safe person who could hear it and help dissect what was going on, to help me face these things, and not just from a point of view of from everybody else, and everybody else is bad, but okay, how did this affect me? Now what are some of my own behaviors, some of my own, if you want to call it toxic traits, that I learned or became adapted to, and unpacking this with somebody. And there's like validation, but there's also like accountability. So a good therapist to unpack at a good pace, at the capacity you have. Some days I had more capacity, some days I had none, and some days I had very little. And she was very compassionate and worked with me every week for 2 years deeply. It was very helpful. But after that, I became a lot more emotionally aware. But I think from a spiritual standpoint, because of the bitterness, I wouldn't say I was becoming like them, but bitterness was starting to make me uncaring, I guess. I mean, not totally, but it was starting to make me a very angry person. And you can see bitterness on people's faces, and that's what was happening to me. And I do give God the credit for healing me and helping me to let go, because it was making me so sick to not fully let go. So that's another, if you want to call it tactic, is what real forgiveness is. I mean, you don't have to hear about it from church or from the Bible if that's triggering. However, hearing it from people who are not church people and their perspective of what forgiveness is, and it's like we put these people in jail in our heart, and then it's like that poison just eats us up. And then even if we have good intentions to help other people, that can bleed out. And again, it's all the anger. It's not worth it. Anger is appropriate to a degree, but I don't know if I'm explaining this well. I'm just kind of talking it out in case anybody else has ever thought about these things or is going through something like this. And so connecting to your body with a safe person, starting to unpack some of the things that happened to you, writing, getting back to yourself instead of so much focus, because it's so consuming when you're around these people of everything that they do. That getting back to yourself and identifying. Like I can remember one time thinking, that's another thing, not just the anger, but being so consumed in my own pain. So there's a balance when it comes to therapy. And sometimes people can get so consumed in themselves and their own pain that they don't have capacity for people outside of themselves. And that can be variable, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying it was something I was starting to become aware of, that I didn't have capacity to show up for other people because I was so like caged in my own pain. And that was something else. So it's been a process. It's been a big process, but I didn't want to become like what happened to me, and without acknowledging what happened to me, feeling what I needed to feel, doing what I needed to do to be aware of patterns and toxic traits, being accountable to my own choices, and also being willing to let go of what happened to me, knowing that you can call it whatever you want to call it, karma, the vengeance of God. Like, it truly is freeing just to go, you take it, I don't even want this anymore. But to get them out of my heart It's like unlocking a door to your heart, just saying, get out. I don't want this anymore. I don't want this pain. Sometimes people think that's all they have left. Everything else has just been stripped from them. And I think that's what happened to me. Everything else was so stripped from me, from my family, my parents, men, friend. Like, everything was just stripped from me. It's like anger is all I had left. And then I became so self-protected that, just lots of different things, that the ramifications of this kind of abuse can have on a person, even on a sensitive person, an empathic person. So this is a very important thing that I did through the years, from 2018 through, now. And I want to make the point that people in the church who harmed me, when I would hear stories about the things that they went through when they were little, either through conversations with their own family, what have you, I'm observing, like, this person went through something really bad, especially, in different forms. I won't get into it, and then in my relationship with this person in the church, they would become abusive to me for the very things that happened to them, but they never dealt with what they went through. And when I say they became like narcissistic, they became cruelly narcissistic. Yet they're going to church, they're singing their songs, they're reading the Bible. So make no mistake, these people, they will know the Bible. They can know all the therapy talk, meaning like what they see online. They can know all about narcissistic abuse and the language, yet having never gone in and done their own work, inevitably become, at least to a degree, like what happened to them. And so I've seen it, and that's why I don't always just blindly trust people in church or people like therapists or whoever, people who say they know about narcissistic abuse, if they haven't gone in and done the work themselves. Just because they know all the lingo, what have you, they know all the Bible verses, that does not mean I trust them. Because in my experience, these people who have in the church who have not dealt with, and people in the narcissistic abuse community or any other spiritual community that has not dealt with what happened, and they spiritually bypass all of it. They use the Bible, or they use deflection, or whatever tactic they use to have to avoid facing themselves and looking within. They know all the lingo. They know all about the narcissistic abuse. They know all about the Bible. They can know how to come in and sound like this or that. And yet they will do the same thing of what happened to them, repeating patterns of like things that happened to me. Now these people are repeating it. But I've noticed the pattern that they don't face themselves. They don't face what happened. They spiritually bypass it. They say it's not a big deal. They don't have time. It doesn't matter, or I don't want to do that, or whatever their reason is. And that's one reason they inevitably will become like what happened to them. And so when it comes to like self-awareness and what happened to us, this is important to do, but it's also important not to get so self-consumed that we become selfish, which is what was happening to me. I didn't mean to be that way. It was just, that's what happened. And now I want sincerely for everything that I've gone through, all this work, all these experiences, it's not for nothing. And so I want it to be used for good. And so how can this impact somebody else outside of myself for the better, for their help? Not for me to go save them. Because I remember that one time with a narcissistic friend when I was really in the throes of depression. And I think I mentioned this in my last video, where she said, I had said, it must be hard to see me suffer. Not that I wanted her to see me suffer, but it is hard to watch people you care about suffer, when you can't do anything about it. But she really didn't care. I don't care about seeing you suffer. I just want to be the one to fix it. So I'm not coming at this with like a God complex of I want to fix people. I have no power to do that. And that's something I've learned through my own experiences. Nobody can fix me. People can be there for me. People can support me. People can walk with me through the pain. People can help me dissect it. I have to do the work. And I have to be accountable for my actions and how these things that happen to me, how it can either impact people around me for the better or not so good. And so people, when they go to therapy, can become narcissistic too, because it's so self-focused. So like there's a point where it's too much self-focus. And so I read this statement, it's right here. It says, how can I improve myself to serve others versus how can I make others see me as special? People will get in lines of like church and get in lines of therapy, for instance, maybe with good intentions, but if there's like this underlying stuff going on underneath, the intention as to why they're wanting to help people can be different based on all this narcissism and self-focus. And so the difference between how can I improve myself to serve others, that I can offer some lessons or whatever at this point, I can offer either solutions or some things that I did or things that I learned, things that I observed that could help impact others for their success, that they can learn lessons a lot quicker than I did and go on to have like a good relationship with themselves and with others, which is the whole point of this. It's not just, again, it's not so self-focused. To not let it be like, how can I make others see me as special because I'm here to help. I remember hearing this in a movie. It was a line that said, self-satisfied do-gooder. And that's what a lot of this can turn into with church and therapists and whatever. So I have to really evaluate my own motives as to why I want to do this. Is it because of anger and bitterness? Is it because of, is it because I want people to see me as good and helpful? Like, can't you see that I'm important? No, at this point I can say I do want this all to be used for good at this point, to impact others for good, and just to be here available to serve. Because I really have to evaluate my own motives. I think people don't do that enough. Evaluating, why do I want to help people? Because for a long time I didn't have the capacity to help. And that's not a bad thing. When you are in significant amount of pain, it's not a bad thing to say I can't help. I don't have the capacity right now. But then there's another kind of like where I don't have the capacity in the sense that because I'm so self-focused or surrounded in my own pain, it's all about me, that I can't see others outside of myself. And then they don't have the capacity in that sense. So that's where it gets not good. But now that I've gone through all of this in my healing journey since 2018 or a little, maybe 2015 to now, and all that to say in my own experience, that I can say I am here now to want success for others, to want to help others, that they can overcome and not fall into the same traps that I did, to be aware of the importance of facing ourselves, our decisions, what happened to us, honoring what happened to us, and that we can move forward. Like, how can we move forward if we just pretend like it didn't happen? Like, that's not the right answer. So all to say, the importance of inner healing, but not becoming too self-focused, and the importance of forgiving. So those are my main points for this video. And thank you for letting me talk it out and listening to what I have to say. Again, I'm just getting started with this video talk, and we'll see what comes of it. But I believe using my voice for good can be impactful, and I'm hoping for good things. Okay, thank you, and I'll be back soon with another video as I think of what topics to cover during the week. Okay. It takes a lot of courage to do this work. It takes a lot of fortitude. It takes a lot of grace for yourself. That's one other thing. I didn't have a lot of grace for myself because people didn't have grace for me, meaning patience, allowance for my weakness. There was very few people that had that for me, so then I didn't have that for me, and then I couldn't give that to others. So that's why it's important to have people who can remind you that these are the things that happen to you. Have compassion, also be willing to hold you accountable, to have grace for your mistakes where you're still learning and being open and learning boundaries and all the stuff. And so when they have grace for you and your mistakes, and you start to learn self-compassion, not self-consumption, and it's all about me and I'm special, but like I have value as a human being in that sense, and valuing that. So, and I don't know if there's anything else, but yeah, so that's the good message is before you go out and save the world, get your own house in order. And the church could really use that message. It's literally in the Bible. How can you serve God's church if you don't have your own house in order? That could mean your own life. That could mean your own, like, literal house and your own family. So it really starts from the inside out. I don't care how cliche that sounds. It's true. It's a principle for a reason. It could be applied to many reasons for why we do things. Okay. All right. I'll be back with another message. Okay, God bless you.